Imagine this. You're elderly, frail, perhaps in pain. Your doctor arrives at your bedside, the very image of respectability, a man you've trusted for years, a pillar of the community. He speaks softly, reassures you, and then, with the flick of a syringe, he eases your suffering. At least that's what everyone believed. But what if the dose wasn't meant to comfort you, but to kill? Welcome back to Pete's World of Poisonous Plants. I'm not a doctor or a toxicologist, and this video is for education and history only. Never experiment with poisonous plants or medicines. With that said, today we're diving into one of the darkest betrayals in British medical history. This is the story of Dr. John Bodkin Adams, a respectable GP in the seaside town of Eastbourne during the 1940s and 1950s. A man who attended church, lived modestly, and was invited into the drawing rooms of wealthy old ladies and gentlemen. Outwardly, he was kindness itself, but beneath the surface lay a scandal so disturbing it still sends shivers down the spine of the medical profession today. The weapon of choice? Morphine and heroin, both derived from the opium poppy, that beautiful flower with its nodding purple blooms and swollen green seed pods. Humans have used the opium poppy for thousands of years, calling it the joy plant. In small doses, it dulls pain and brings euphoria. In higher doses, it silences the body's most basic reflex: breathing, respiratory depression. You simply stop drawing breath. Your heart slows, your skin turns cold, and death steals in quietly, almost politely. It looks to the untrained eye like natural causes, and that is what made Adams' work so terrifyingly effective. Between 1946 and 1956, over 160 of Adams's patients slipped away in exactly this fashion, in comas, under heavy sedation, their final hours eased by the doctor they trusted most. Suspicious? Yes. But the horror doesn't stop there, because nearly half of these patients, wealthy, often childless, sometimes lonely, left Adams money or gifts in their wills: cash, cars, furniture, even a Rolls-Royce. The respectable GP was quietly amassing a fortune from the dead. Now, in fairness, many of Adams' defenders at the time argued that these were simply grateful patients rewarding a caring physician. But when the numbers were revealed, it painted a grotesque picture. Out of 310 wills examined, 132 named Adams as a beneficiary. That isn't gratitude, that's a pattern. Let's look at one victim, Edith Alice Morrell. Once a vibrant woman, she suffered a stroke in 1948. Adams visited her daily. At first, he seemed to bring comfort. But as her condition worsened, he prescribed ever higher doses of heroin and morphine. Nurses grew concerned. They recorded in their notebooks that the injections seemed excessive. Edith lingered in this twilight state for years until finally, in 1950, she died under Adams' care. And then there was Gertrude Hullett, a wealthy widow. In 1956, Adams signed prescriptions for powerful sedatives and morphine. She died suddenly, and only later did investigators realize Adams had backdated some of the documents. Once again, her will included generous bequests to the good doctor. By now, the whispers in Eastbourne had grown to a roar. Could the kindly GP really be hastening his patients' deaths for money? Police investigations began, Scotland Yard circled, and in 1957, Adams was arrested and charged with the murder of Edith Morrell. The nation was transfixed. For the first time, a British doctor stood in the dock accused of being a serial killer. The trial was extraordinary. The prosecution laid out its case: the drugs, the wills, the suspicious deaths. But the defense played its trump card, the doctrine of double effect. They argued that Adams was merely easing pain, that in doing so, life might have been shortened, yes, but death was not his direct goal. The jury deliberated just 44 minutes before acquitting him of murder. In the case of Gertrude Hullett, the charge was quietly dropped. And so John Bodkin Adams walked free. But the story doesn't end there. He was soon convicted of lesser charges: prescription fraud, false statements on cremation forms, failing to keep proper drug records, and obstruction. He was struck off the medical register, only to be reinstated a few years later. Astonishingly, he returned to practice as a GP, though stripped of his license to prescribe dangerous drugs. The suspected serial killer, the doctor linked to over 160 suspicious deaths, went back to seeing patients as though nothing had happened. The betrayal here is almost unbearable. Doctors hold the most sacred of trusts, to heal, to comfort, to protect. Adams twisted that trust, exploited it, and hid behind the image of a caring family doctor. He showed the system's fatal weakness, that a doctor, cloaked in authority, could operate unchecked, unchallenged, and above suspicion. And here is perhaps the most chilling part. After the scandal of Adams, very little changed. Yes, there was outrage. Yes, newspapers screamed about Dr. Death. But there were no sweeping reforms, no new safeguards on prescribing, no stricter rules on how deaths were certified. The establishment chose to believe Adams was an exception, not a warning. That complacency proved deadly, because nearly 50 years later another doctor would emerge, another GP again trusted by his community, another man who wielded morphine like a weapon. His name was Harold Shipman. Shipman was no anomaly. He was the proof that Adams had been the warning everyone ignored. Shipman murdered at least 215 patients over 2 decades, using the same silent plant-derived poison, morphine. This time the scale was undeniable. This time the evidence was overwhelming. And finally, this time the system could not look away. The Shipman inquiry exposed catastrophic failures. It showed how easy it was for a single doctor to cover his tracks, to sign death certificates unchallenged, to obtain and administer lethal drugs without scrutiny. It led to sweeping reforms, stricter controls on prescribing, independent medical examiners for all deaths, and tighter rules on cremation and coroner oversight. Safeguards that should have been in place after Adams, but which took half a century and hundreds of lives to implement. So when we look back on Dr. John Bodkin Adams, we see more than a doctor who may have killed for greed or twisted mercy. We see the blueprint for betrayal, the cracks in the system, and the fatal arrogance of thinking, it could never happen here. It did happen. It happened twice, and it is a lesson we ignore at our peril. If you found this story as chilling as I did, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more tales of poison, medicine, and the darker side of history. And while this case shows how devastating a betrayal of trust can be, it's important to remember that stories like Adams are the extreme exception. Thankfully, they are vanishingly rare. Over the decades since, doctors, nurses, and all emergency service workers have worked tirelessly to rebuild and earn our trust, and overwhelmingly they have succeeded. Today, the vast majority of medical professionals dedicate their lives to first-class care, often at great personal cost. So yes, trust can be dangerous in the wrong hands, but in the right ones, it remains one of the most powerful medicines we have.